Hey y'all, I'm David. Welcome to my shop, and today we're talking about my 1970 Dodge Charger. This is going to be a huge focus of what I do for these videos, and we're going to kick this thing off together. I've had this car about 4 or 5 years, but I've really just been working on it in the last 2. And what I'll do is we'll start and I'll go through all the component selections that I've done in that time, the chassis that I've built, and then I'm also, I guess, going to explain to you why this bird cage is around the car, because I'm about to lock this thing back down to the frame table, and I'm going to cut out all that work and start over. I'll explain why, but the short answer is I think I can do it better the second time. But if there's something that I miss, something that I don't spend enough time on, and you have a question, use the comments. I'll read every single one of them and make sure that I use that to make future videos. This should always be a conversation. So I'm looking forward to getting started, and let's get going.
Before I extol the virtues of disassembling what many might call a perfectly good car and risk creating a piece of stationary art metal, let me provide a bit of context for where the Charger resides in the broader Willomet fleet.
So my first project car was the Suburban, and I would enjoy that and drive that as I built it. You know, the kind of normal weekend process. Tear it apart Friday night, get it back together Sunday evening, and then you're enjoying it through the week. And it's that driving it while you build it that extends your patience. If you can enjoy your project while building it, especially if it's your only one, then, you know, goodness sakes, please do have a running, driving sort of day to, build. It's getting hot out. Harriet's got to lay on the concrete. I always had a different plan for the Charger, or really for the project vehicle that was going to live in this space. And it was to build something from kind of as much of nothing as possible, or as low a level as possible. And this is what we settled on. Had tried, thought about 1 or 2 things before there, but eventually always liked the big Mopar B-body. And what I enjoy, kind of in line with the Suburban, is you take a big, heavy Chevy and you turn it into a rock crawler. It's got its limitations, but it's got huge capability. I also think the Mopar, it's a big, heavy car, but it's going to have its limitations in an autocross or road course type of setup, but it's also going to have huge capability if you take the time to construct it thoughtfully and from a base level that addresses all the compromises that were inherent in the design.
So, given that I have a running and driving rig in the Suburban, I can dive way deep into the Charger, building the car exactly the way I want.
In the office. So this is gonna be a driver's car. Comfortable for long stretches, grand touring certainly, but this is very focused on the driver's experience and what it means to be sitting right here behind the wheel. So that's why we've got a manual. That's why the engine is set back. So for balance, in corners. Hold up, that is skipping entirely too far ahead. Let's go back to those first few months after I got the car and what I found as I started taking it apart. It was an original 1970 440 RT Charger. It would have come with a 444 barrel and then an automatic. But all those things that made it an RT, that made it that made it really cool, those are all gone by the time it came. At the time, that's what I wanted. I wanted something that didn't have pedigree, that I, quite frankly, so that I could afford it. And so it had no engine or trans, the rear end was gone, the front end was a bunch of hodgepodge of 318 stuff. And the car turned out to be in really very rough shape.
Let me show you exactly what I mean when I say rough shape.
Here's where the previous owner really did a number on this car. This is some extraordinary junk work but done by the previous owner. This is actually a little panel that's glued in from the back side, and then you can see that they did their little stacked tacks here and then really ruined this window channel. It's not uncommon for these things to really get, boogered up right here. This is a normal spot for rust where, water may have collected, and there's just a little bit of corrosion. These things weren't particularly
well kept, they weren't special until recently, so it's just the junk that happens to old cars. It's this part where they ruined the window channel that really keeps me from being able to repair it. I could cut out and do a sail pillar patch right here. I even have the parts up on the shelf. I could do a sail pillar patch right here, but the very fact that I'm not going to be able to get back to this correct thickness, and probably, because of that, I don't think I'll get the window to seal right, and it would be a ton of work. And I think for the same or fewer hours in terms of work, it's easier just to put a whole quarter panel on it. Quite frankly, if they had just left the car alone, the rust and even the damage to the rear quarters would have been repairable. It's the hack job repair work that drives me to abandon these panels. All fixable, it just takes time. It's a little bit of money, but a lot of time. So, over the last year and a half, I've cut out the entire unibody and all of the damage that was done. This car was obviously on a forklift at some time. Cut all that out. I built my own frame table, locked the body down to it, built a new ladder frame inside of it that's tied to the unibody. So it's think of it as like a rigidly framed unibody structure. And then since then, I acquired an engine, which is an LQ4 from an 03 Chevrolet, and then a TR6060 out of 2011 Camaro that I've converted to have a lot of Magnum parts on it, so it bolts up pretty easily. The reason for the LS's celebrity among gearheads is simple. It is perhaps the most widely available and well-supported modern power plant, and it performs quite nicely with a turbo or supercharger. Rather than follow someone else's rules for how to build my car, I'm doing what makes the most sense to me. The LS in a charger will not make sense to some folks to whom brand purity is really, really important. I walked you through the damage that's on the car. You can see that it's not a restoration, and you can see that this car lived a pretty rough life. I don't have any of the original stuff that went with this. It came to me fully plucked. It's really just a shell of a car. And to go through the effort to throw, a Hemi in it or something along those lines would be cool. That's just not my build. My build is one where the car is intended to drive 3 roads in the continental US and to do so competitively. 3 highways. First is the Twisted Sisters in South Central Texas. That's a personal favorite. I've driven it in the Suburban. That is not a corner carving machine, so I appreciate the scenery in that, but I want to drive it in something that's much more tuned. Number 2 is the Angeles Crest Highway going through the San Gabriel Mountains in Southern California, just outside of Los Angeles. And then last, certainly not least, is the end of US 129 on the North Carolina-Tennessee border, the Tail of the Dragon. Like 11-ish miles and 300 curves. That's been on my list for a good long time. This is the car that I want to build to go and do it. Arguably a Gen 3 Hemi would have also worked. My problem with the Gen 3 Hemi really is that they're just not as well supported in the aftermarket. That's changing lately, but it's not nearly as well supported as the LS platform. And self-sustainment on the road, out in the field, is an important criteria, especially if I'm going to go do these road trips. Since there's no real sentimental value in this build, it really just comes down to size, weight balance, and the availability of parts. And so it helps me push it back without consuming the entire cabin, and still gives my feet room to move. These size 12s have got to push a pedal. So you can't push back too far in terms of the engine, but you can push back farther when the engine is, dimensionally smaller. One of the great things about having the engine set back is you get all of this weight that's moved a substantial distance back. The bell housing parting line is right about where the windshield is, right about the lower part of the windshield. And that moves it's about 525, 530 pounds of engine, and then 150 pounds of transmission. It moves that whole assembly back, 1 whole foot.
And so it balances the car out a lot better to where the front and rear distribution is going to be closer to 50-50. Previously, I think these things are like 60-40 if you had the big 440 big block. So we're going for a much better balanced sort of equation. Technically, that makes this a mid-engine car, what you'd call a mid-front engine. So that's like Viper and Corvette and all that sort of deal, where you're taking the engine and pushing it backwards so that the pendulum of the big heavy engine sitting out in front of the tires that you're trying to push around the track ends up coming behind, and this big heavy lump ends up following the tires around. Rev 0 of this whole sort of thing is going to use this LQ4 with an iron block. Later on, I'll do a Rev 1, and I'll use an aluminum block at that time. I just firmly believe everything has a revision level. Everything is at a rev level. Me personally, I very rarely hit on my end design the first time I build something. So that's just me acknowledging that for me to do my very best work, I need to be prepared to, build once, revise, build a second time. And in this case, it's going to be two frames that I build for this car before I finally kind of get to the level that I want to be. So let me show you a little bit of detail about what I put into this chassis. This is the factory frame rail right here. These are the two bumper mount holes, and that's connecting it down to the table here. So the car is locked down, took away all the suspension componentry, the original bump stops, all that junk. And then this frame rail actually does extend all the way through here and hooks up to this 5-inch by 4-inch torque box that I built. And I'm calling it a torque box just because it's really just a connector to the rocker, but in the old, in Mopar terminology, you would call this typically a torque box. So this is 5-inch by 4-inch. I made this, you can't really buy that as a rectangle tube. And so I built this, it's got dimple plates on the inside. It's very, very strong. It's probably a little heavier than it needs to be. This is a 4x3 rocker that runs the length of the car all the way to the back. It's got some plates inside it as well.
I am not even gonna lie, I totally overbuilt this.
Then I did these overlay plates. Look who's here. Look who's here. Then I did these overlay plates to strengthen up the factory frame and then connect it to this rocker box here. The idea of the overlay plates is all this stuff is a combination of 16 and 14 gauge. This is 110, so slightly under 1/8 inch. And it overlays and then it connects to the torque box, and then you get your inner chassis from it.
Compared to the original unibody structure, this is a very different method for transferring the suspension loading through the chassis.
So if the stress from the front suspension, weight of the car, all the handling, gets transmitted along the rocker here, then this very same thing is what I did back here. Again, this is 4x3 here on the rocker. It's got a plate inside that holds it all together. Then you got a 4x2 cross member, and then the beginning of some 4x2 rails. Like a buddy of mine said, he goes, he's like, David, I like the car that you're building. I'm also excited that you're changing up the frame because you were building a tank. All right, this is a person that knows of which he speaks, so I will take the advice. No more tanks. I've already got that, so. So that's what's going on with the car. The very next thing, we're gonna lock this thing back down to the frame table and the bird cage. I'm gonna show you how the unibody gets protected and held in place while I pull the frame out from inside. Then we're gonna go through all the parts that are coming in from Chassis Works and how those are gonna fit in, where we're gonna move the wheelbases
I'm going to show you how I measured for everything, because it actually is, it's deceptively simple. It really is. And then we're going to get this all put in the car, tacked, and before you know it, this car is going to be looking somewhat complete again. But until then, it all comes out, 100% of it. I'm excited about that process, really. I'm excited for what that means for this series that we get to make, and you know, what I get to share with you guys. So.
Now that we're caught up, the real work can begin. Thanks for watching, and y'all take care.